Okay, I'm Jason Bell, which we're going to talk about. This session is about getting started with Sass and Compass. It's meant as a beginner introduction to using these tools for writing CSS in your projects. If you're already up and running with Sass, you probably won't get too much out of it, other than a refresher. But if it's the kind of thing that you said, I've heard about it and it sounds interesting, I've just never got it running, the intent is that we just walk through the simple steps of how to do that and what the great features are. Of course. I'm Jason Bell. I run a small design and development shop called Start Interaction in St. Charles. And we work with small and mid-sized businesses building communication strategy and developing platforms for them to communicate with their audiences. You can find me in different places on the internet, and I help organize the Fox Valley Drupal group. And we meet monthly in the area, and we're glad that everybody came out to this first Drupal camp at Fox Valley, and we're looking forward to continuing with it next year. So Sass, and what is Sass? You can get lots of different explanations, and so I'm going to go with mine. It's a preprocessor for CSS, and for me, it helped me fall in love with writing CSS again. You work on Drupal projects of scale, it starts to get to be a real chore to keep up with your style sheets, and Sass makes it a lot more manageable all of a sudden. Sass is a tool that's written in Ruby and distributed via Ruby gems, so you do need to have a little bit of comfort on the command line. Not too much, but just enough to get running. There's two syntaxes that the language can be written in. One is files with an extension .sass. It's very white space and indenting strict. And the other is SCSS, which was the second version that they put together, which is definitely, it's much more CSS-like. And you can actually use your existing CSS files, change the extension, and you're already using Sass. So that's kind of what I tell people that are beginning. Just go with the SCSS. It's quick, it's easy, and you get it done. Do you need a graphic user interface? Well, you can have them. CodeKit on Mac OS X is a really great tool when you're getting started. It's super easy. You don't have to install the Ruby gems yourself. It comes all packaged up. You just tell your project where it lives through CodeKit, and CodeKit begins compiling for you. There are some limitations to it, especially when you move into using Compass and Compass extensions. So if you are just getting started, it's a nice place to start, but you should just get comfortable using the command line a little bit to move forward. I found a newer product called Preproc, which looks like it's multi-platform, but brings a lot of the features of CodeKit to Windows. And if you're running Linux, you don't need a GUI anyway. So if you're on a Mac and you're running OS X, Ruby is installed on your machine, so you're all set. Typically, that means you have to run some of these commands with sudo, which some people don't like, but when you don't really know too much about what you're doing, that kind of makes it easy. But installing Sass is almost as simple as gem install Sass. It's going to go out and fetch the package and put it in the right place. To create a Sass project, like I mentioned with the SCSS syntax, all of your CSS style sheets are valid for Sass usage. You can just change their extension and get running. Sass watches your files and compiles your SCSS files into CSS files. So in the case of a Drupal theme, you specify your style sheet to the CSS that gets generated for you by Sass. And you do this by the command watch on the command line. You basically run Sass, watch this sheet, style SCSS, and turn it into style CSS. There are all kinds of best practices for how to structure your project with nested directories and everything, but just to get started, keep it easy.
What would I do to that file? I got a CSS file, I change the file extension, I fire it to there.
So if you change the extension and you run watch, it's just going to recompile what you've already done, and depending on the settings of your project, will compress it or minimize the code, but it won't change anything. It won't change any of the output until you start using the Sass authoring. I want to highlight, I think there's 4 main features with Sass that make it really alluring and are places to kind of get started with big wins in your project. And the first is very simple, it's variables. Right? How many of you have written a style sheet and you're using a specific color shade and you have to remember the hex value, and every time you get down to line 700, F046, you're going back up to the top. I don't know what that. So variables makes this really cool because you can set colors to things that you're going to remember, like black or green or blue, which is the naming convention I use in my projects because that's the way I'm thinking about it. Right? I'm in the context of this project, and this is the green I'm using. So we set a variable with the $sign, and then declare what that string should be. You can use hex values, RGB, etc. You can see I've also demonstrated here a base font size and a base line height variable, which is useful. And so most of these feature slides will show the Sass code on one side and then what it looks like as CSS when it comes out. So we set the variable of the color to black in the body, and you can see on this side it's not 000 because I set my black to be just a little not black, just a dark gray. And then my font size and line height have been written out. And the padding shows how you can do multiplication in your Sass files. So I said use the base font size times 2 as the padding on the body, and it just does the math for you. So you can kind of start these patterns that you reuse throughout your project to make your life easier. And then my header is green. Great. So variables should be a pretty simple item there. Nesting is another really cool feature. And in the examples here, I'm showing a few different things. Let me know if you can't quite see the examples and I can zoom in. So I used to do it this way, where I would put some declarations on my footer, then the paragraphs inside the footer, and then the paragraph with the class of legal inside of the footer. And then I'm also showing here an example of, say I'm using Modernizer as a front-end tool to detect a browser that doesn't support CSS gradients and providing a fallback image. So this is what I would have written in the CSS, and with Sass over here, I start with footer and I apply that border. Looks like I forgot to put the background image in. We can look past that. You can see I have a bunch of rules nested underneath. I'm going to skip the gradients for a second and just go down to P, paragraph. That's going to output that example for me. And then I've put in another nested example. So I would have a footer paragraph anchor that is green. And then you'll note I'm using syntax here, and the class name legal. What that does is it applies the class to the parent. So it gives me this. Now, you see I'm also using and in that top example, but I've reversed it. This is a great one, especially for progressively enhancing your projects. I don't want to have to do another declaration block that says, oh, if there's no CSS gradients, do this to the footer. I want to keep all my styles together for the footer in that one code block. So I can say the class, no CSS gradients, and, which prepends it to the parent element. It's a really nice way to keep your your style fallbacks for less feature-enhanced browsers in place with the rest of your style. You can nest very deep. You should not. You should write better CSS. You should think about what you're writing, but you can nest quite deep. Mixins is another one of the cool features. And comes into play a lot when we start talking about Compass in a little bit. But a mixin allows us to create a reusable chunk of code and then apply it to different different declarations in our style sheet. So if you're sharing, my example here is a font family and font weight combination that I want to apply in different areas on my project. At the top, you'll see there's a variable set called sans serif and a variable set called serif. And I typically do this in any of my projects to set up my base font stacks with a variable to make it easy to drop them in. And then I typically have anywhere between 2 and 6 primary type treatments that I'm using for headers or body text. And so that's typically a combination of a font family and a font weight. So I've set up a mixin here called font body that uses the sans serif stack at a weight of 400, and my headers as using the serif font stack. So then in the body section, I include font body, and for headers, I include font headers. And it spits out this for me in my code. Why? Why am I going to all this trouble? Well, what happens when your designer comes back and says, well, I don't want to use Helvetica New anymore. We're going to use Proxima Nova because we got a new Typekit account and it's so cool. Right? All I have to do is go in and change this variable instead of doing a find and replace for everywhere I put Helvetica New in my site. So the syntax there is you create a mixin by declaring @mixin and then the name, and then you apply it by @include. In selector inheritance and property inheritance is pretty cool, where we can extend the properties of one class, one chunk of code onto other pieces. So here we have something with a class of error. Then we have a second object that has the same class of errors, but also has a class of intrusion. And then we have something called bad error, when something really bad happens. And I'm going to extend the error class into bad error, so we can see what that does over here. First off, we see the class of error gets what I said it should get. But we also see that it has a comma include of bad error because I extended that class. So I've basically said, bad error should get everything that error gets. note this middle block. It actually picks up that middle error intrusion declaration as well. So now I get bad error intrusion, and it extends what error is doing. And then it gets that one change, which is its border width. So when it's a really bad error on your page, you get extra border. Mixins and inheritance, extend inheritance are cool tools, but they can also lead to a lot of extra code because it can begin to start duplicating things. If you extend the same thing over and over and over, well, now you get this whole list of stuff that's, you could have just used a single class and applied it on each of those elements in your HTML. You can write these extend placeholders that are silent, so people call them silent extends. What it means is it doesn't write that block out into the CSS. So I don't have a block called message over here. I'm using percent message, and I set up a set of rules to put a border radius, and decrease the font size a little bit. And say I have error, success, and warning classes for my notifications, which is pretty typical in a Drupal install. I can extend the baseline of that to include the border radius, and font size, and then apply just the specific background colors for each of the specific states. Yes, in the base Drupal install, the system messages has a class of messages on it. So you could do the same thing by just using .messages on that block. It depends how. For me, this becomes this stronger interplay between the HTML that we output to the screen and the CSS. And we can selectively choose and include class names as needed. And so, as I was alluding to, do I mix in, do I extend, or do I class? It really depends on your project. Do you want your HTML filled with bootstrap style classes on everything? Or is a little bit of duplication in your compiled CSS an okay trade-off to you? Here's a quote from a person named Chris Lamb, and if you reference these slides offline later, that's a link through to him and his article, but rule of thumb, it's better to not extend a class selector, but rather use a placeholder in its place. So that was the 8.5-minute rapid-fire introduction to Sass. I just wanted to highlight some of the things that it comes with that are fun to play with. It's important to remember as you're tooling around with it, look at the CSS that gets written out from what you're doing. Make sure that you still are happy with the output. Sass is just a tool to write CSS, and it can make it fun, and it can make it faster and easier to update, but you still want to have good CSS going on the outside. So what is Compass? Yeah?
Just so I understand this, you have your Sass file, you put that in your theme, and you write your Sass out, crunch it through your Ruby tool, and it spits out CSS in that directory.
Right.
So it's only like one intro step.
Yeah, it's like this tiny little helper to just write out your CSS for you so that you can focus on keeping your styles together, moving quickly, setting variables so that you can make big changes quickly. And Compass will show this even a little bit more. Compass is a collection of tools and best practices for writing Sass with Sass. It's dependent on Sass, so you have to have Sass to use Compass. Again, written in Ruby, you get it through a Ruby gem. But one of the cool benefits with Compass is that it's project aware, so it provides a few other little tools with your images and your scripts inside of your theme, and even fonts if you're using web font files. Again, slight differences by platform, and this is a really great link for explaining small differences between Mac, Windows, Linux getting up and running. But again, it pretty much boils down to gem install Compass. If you don't already have Sass and you run this command, it's going to download and install Sass for you because it requires Sass to run. So if you're just getting started, you can run this one command and get both tools. With Compass, we actually create a project with Compass. And it can generate this project directory for you. So if you're creating a new Drupal theme and you're playing around with these tools, you can change directories to sites all themes, and you can Compass create your theme name. Put your theme name in. And it's going to create a project directory for you that looks like this. It will be a folder called Your Theme. It will have a config.rb file that you'll wonder what is that. It would have a little index file, an images directory, a Sass directory, and a style sheets directory. The directory names are controllable. You can change those as you like. So this is like if I just ran Compass create theme name, this is my config file for the Compass project. You can see I have some places where I can set my paths. So I can set, maybe I want my style sheets directory to be called CSS. Maybe I want my images directory to be IMG, because I like short names. Maybe my JavaScript directory is JS instead of JavaScript. You can control those things in your config file. You can also control the output style of the CSS. Expanded, nested, compact, or compressed, depending on if you're still building your project and reviewing it or about to push it into production. The relative assets line is one of my favorite little tricks that I'll show in a code example later. If I say relative assets is true, it makes Will's cookie more delicious. It makes remembering your image paths when you're writing your CSS a lot easier to do. You don't have to remember how many directories deep you're nested and how many dots and slashes do I need. And then line comments will actually output in compiled CSS a reference back to the line number in your SCSS file for you. So if you're kind of reading through the compiled CSS, it'll tell you where it came from. So when we're using Compass, we're using Compass on top of Sass. Compass uses its own compiler. So instead of running this Sass command to watch my files, I'm now telling Compass to watch my files. And because Compass is project aware, I only have to tell it to watch. I don't have to tell it exactly what to watch. I just need to be in the root of my Compass project and say, keep an eye on things. I'm going to go work. So Compass will watch and compile your changes as you go. You can leave it in a little terminal window and watch it. If you like that kind of thing. Watch the watcher. And you could videotape yourself watching the watcher, and then you could watch yourself watching the watcher later. Compass Core, or Compass, the project itself, provides just a robust set of code patterns that you can reuse in your projects. It's a lot of general use case things like applying a border radius to something, or generating a CSS-based gradient. It has a large section of typography utilities that are both powerful and overwhelming. And then it has some like common style utilities like, hey, I've got an unordered list, but I want it to be a horizontal block list. And it has kind of a pattern built for you. You can just apply inline block list, and it'll set that up for you. So a couple examples with Compass. It has CSS3 modules. So if I want to put a border radius on something, and I don't want to remember how many different vendor prefixes I have to worry about, I can @include border radius. I can apply a box shadow by @include box shadow. You'll notice I'm not providing any arguments in it, so it's going to have a default value. I can also set default values in my variables sheet with some syntax that I can just demonstrate here. And so I've reused my error and success examples from previously, but I've switched my rules on the message placeholder to put a border radius and a box shadow so that I can support WebKit and Mozilla browsers as well as new browsers that are already implementing that. And you'll see that it writes out properly for you. It writes out the vendor prefixes for Opera, Microsoft, WebKit, Mozilla, and then it puts the CSS3 version last so that as everybody catches up, you can eventually just get rid of the old support. Some of the typography tools, like I said, they're very powerful, but they're also somewhat overwhelming. There's this whole vertical rhythm system that is designed to help you kind of keep somewhat of a baseline rhythm to your layout so that things read and breathe appropriately without weird gaps and squishiness. I didn't go too deep into it because, again, we just want you to get up and running. I do the @include establish baseline, and it writes out that HTML property for me. And does anybody know where those two values came from? You might remember from the code example earlier, I set a variable for base font size and base line height. And that's where those things come from. So in my variables sheet, I set a base font size and a line height, and then I tell my primary sheet to establish a baseline that pulls those variables in and writes it out for my HTML tag. The header 1 has two mix-ins on it. One is to adjust the font size for me. And so instead of doing the math for myself, and keeping my little calculator handy, I can just take the comp from my designer, which is in Photoshop or Fireworks or whatever, and is using pixel or point values. And I can just say, well, they wanted that to be 39 pixels. Great. Now it goes and it does 39 divided by 16 for me and sets it in M relative unit size. Then I'm also using that rhythm mix-in, which does a margin and padding on the object, 0, 0, 0, and 1. So 0 margin top, 0 padding top, 0 padding bottom, and then 1 unit of margin on the bottom based on the 39 pixels size of my header. So you can see where I kept those together. If I don't tell it what to base the units on, it's going to base the unit on the base font size. and in this case, we'll probably make it too small. Yes?
So basically using something like rhythm and establish club and the adjust font size too, just eases the process of taking something from Photoshop and implementing it.
Yeah, it really does.
So you don't have to think, what is that?
Right,
What
right, like,
EM is
how many
that?
times have you taken something like Xscope on a Mac or some tool and measured the pixel values from a Photoshop document? Or the ruler tool, which is really horrible to use.
It seems like a great idea at the time, like when you're first implementing it, but I wonder, like in the long term, will this make sense to someone like a year later? If it's font size 239, why did we choose 39 pixels? You know?
Well, would it make sense if it just said font size 39 pixels? You know, it's kind of the same arbitrary value that somebody put in at some point based on whatever they had to build it from. So, and you can, of course, comment your Sass files as much as you want. Comments? That's for programmers. Really?
Come to my session.
If that's news to you, we've got bigger issues. Let's have them off. So then some of those utilities I mentioned. So, you know, like the horizontal menu, which is everybody's favorite. Do I float the whole list or just the list items? Do I need to float the list and float the list items in order for them to clear and create an entire object on the page? Well, this great utility from Compass includes inline block list, and then it takes an argument which applies, let's see, I think it's left and right padding on the list item. So I'm telling the list inside of my nav element to be an inline block list, and each of those list items gets one relative unit of padding on each side. This is an awesome one that I discovered some time after getting started. It's a headings utility, and it does exactly what you might assume it to do. It applies the rule set to the headings that you put in. So I could say, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I say 1, 4, it's going to apply everything to H1, H2, H3. So from here to here. So I want the same mix in from our early variables, right? The serif font at a weight of 400, 600. And then another great utility that you'll see the output for when I scroll down, link colors. Really awesome. It takes a state for, you know, link, hover, active, focus, and visited. And in this example, I've left a few of those variables just as written, and then inherited the primary color value from my anchor. In my Sass variable sheet, I will set color values like green, blue, red, and orange, and then I'll have another block that is, you know, link, hover, active, visited, focus, and then just apply those color variables to these so that I could just use that base utility. It makes it a lot easier. So here's what include block, inline block list does is it sets the list itself, puts a clear fix on it so that it wraps around the list items inside of it, removes any list style type from the list items, sets their display to inline block, and the vertical alignment, and then there's that padding of 1M on each side. My headings 1 to 4 here is first applying the font headers mix in, and then since I nested the anchors inside, I get a whole nother set of if my header is a link, if it was visited, etc., etc., etc. These examples kind of show the marriage of variables and the utilities and the mixin and the nesting. And then there's this whole other world of Compass extensions, which are other tools written to sort of plug into Compass and provide you with other sets of amazingness for yourself. Sorry, I just want to make sure I don't go too far. Some of my favorites at this time are a project called Breakpoint, which allows you to set and use breakpoint variables quickly and easily in your code. Singularity, which is a grid system that helps you break out of the 960 box and build and create and apply grids however you want to in various different contexts, nested, symmetrical, asymmetrical, lots of really cool stuff. I'm not going to go into these very much, I'm just going to reference them. Sassy Buttons is a cool Compass extension that gives you a lot of just good baseline button styles, so you don't have to rewrite them every time. And then Toolkit is a project that kind of bundles up a lot of progressive enhancement and responsive web items all up in one project. The basics of using Compass extensions is, again, pretty easy. Gem install the extension. In our config file for the Compass project, we have to require it. So that's the middle box. And then in my base Sass sheet, I need to import that extension. So once I download it, any project it's requiring.
The brackets are actually something.
No, the brackets, yeah. You know, when you write examples, it's like, this is placeholder text, replace me. Yeah, the brackets. So real quickly, here's kind of what Breakpoint does. I set a medium breakpoint and a large breakpoint. And then I'm just showing how quick and easy I can do responsive style sheet writing here, in that when I hit that medium breakpoint, I want my font size to bump up just a little bit because I've got a little more screen real estate. I want it to be slightly more readable. And then when I hit a large screen, I'm going to make that font size a little bit bigger on a global level. So you notice it's all nested inside of the element. And I didn't put up the slide to show what this outputs, but it puts in an at media query, mid-width, 450 pixels, foo, font size. So it does all that media query writing for you, and you don't have to keep copying and pasting the same rule over and over. And then if your design shifts and you need to bump your breakpoints, you just have to change it once. I'm going to just skip Singularity for now because I think we'll go down a rabbit hole. Sassy Buttons is just a quick, easy syntax. Sassy Buttons has a bunch of pre-built styles. So you can apply the style with that includes Sassy Button, and you can use one of the built-in styles, like in this case shiny, with 15 pixel font size, 26 pixel line height, and then the two colors to create the gradient for on the button, and then it will darken when you push it. So it's a cool project to look at. And then Toolkit, again, it has little mix-ins for applying border box model. It has tools for dealing with fluid media, intrinsic ratios of videos, vertical centering, crazier color functions. You can darken your color variables or lighten your color variables, adjust their hue, all right in your style sheet. And so what does any of this have to do with Drupal? Nothing. which is what's really great about it is because you can apply it to any project you're working on. And there are modules out there called Sass or SCSS, and there's a module called Compass. But these are authoring tools, and they're meant to be used in the process of creating your project, not in deploying your project. You don't want to compile your style sheet every time a page request is made. Right? Just taxing your server. So no, I've not used these, and I'm not quite clear on when you would want to. Resource links for Sass Compass. There's a link here to a much more in-depth and better presented presentation by Snugga on these same ideas that goes in more depth on a few of them. Sassmeister is a really cool online web app where you can just play around and kind of learn Sass without getting things installed and running. And a few questions. We've got a couple minutes here.
How does this work with workgroups and version control?
How does it work with version control?
Yeah, because your SCSS file, it's a local file. This is for like local development before you get it out on the server, right?
Yes.
And so how you've got a team, like 2 people working on the style sheets.
Yeah. You could version your Sass files and then have one person appointed to kind of compile them at the end, so that you can track your changes through the Sass files, and then in moving deployment out to a development staging or production server, just recompile the CSS and go. As long as you're keeping track of your Sass changes, they should all apply to your CSS.
So if you have 2 people, it's going to be the same position. So I don't know about your Sass file, and I go straight to the CSS file that you are affected. And I change that, and you change something like the Sass file. Would the canceling each other's work?
Well, your work would be gone the next time I compile source. So there's that.
So
And also, if we're on the same team, we're communicating and saying, we're using this. You don't know me. We're using this tool set to do our work. And there are other little like mixes you can put in to put this giant block at the top of the CSS file that says, "Don't change
I
this."
feel like
Same question.
Will we begin about what we do?
Yeah.
Okay,
What do you guys
we're
do?
gonna say the same thing. What we do is, we like commit the Sass files and CSS files, and then you have to like do a different commit, like you change, like what we do, we change something, change in Sass, and so then we commit that change, and then we make sure like full for master, and make sure that we like merge. What do we do? We like merge in the master CSS, and then we like
So we
run
just
the bunch again.
typically try to commit our Sass changes and the compiled CSS in separate commits, because the CSS changes almost always
All the time.
conflict. Like if somebody else has made a Sass edit and their CSS is compiled, and then you when it merges, it's going to conflict. But the Sass is going to merge just fine. So if you merge the Sass or commit the Sass, it will merge cleanly.
Yes.
The CSS will throw a merge conflict, and you just Compass compile, and boom, you get
And
it.
it's gone.
Yep,
Yeah.
and it's all better.
That's a good.
Because we have compressed CSS, so there's no way to
Sure.
merge conflict with that. Everything is one line, so
Right.
you're just you can't.
Yeah.
Merge conflict is what.
Yeah,
So
that's
you just if there's a merge conflict in the CSS, it's no big thing.
I've had the benefit of not having to work with anybody else. That sounds like a really good way to do it.
If I have an existing site and I've got a kind of complex CSS file,
Yeah.
how do I get that into Sass? Is there
Well,
a way to import it?
you can get your tools installed. First off, change the file extension of your CSS file and compile it once into the new CSS file. And then you can start to make little changes throughout your CSS file as you like, because your CSS as written is valid Sass syntax.
But it wouldn't make, if there was a common color code, it wouldn't make that into a variable.
It won't create the variable for you, but you could then start to do that and set your variables. And on that note, like most Sass-based Compass-based projects will break things up into more and more files. And you know, if you used to do like a base style sheet and a type style sheet or a layout style sheet, you can do that a little more easily with Sass and break things up more finite. And then you have a primary style.scss that imports all of your partial files. I didn't really get into partials today, but you can read about that. Yeah, well,
Can I ask the Sass? I'm calling you a Sass girl, I'm sorry. Do you like it? Is it worth it?
Me, am I the Sass girl?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I'm a Sass girl. Yeah, I like it. I don't know like a ton about it. Like I'm still trying to figure out in particular like valids, max.
yeah.
Are you using Compass?
Certainly all.
Yeah, yeah.
As a developer, it makes it much easier to know.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
And like as somebody who's in the Ruby community as well, like this is like 80% of all Ruby developers use it. It's ubiquitous at this point.
I find it speeds up my front-end development in some ways. In other ways, it makes me more flexible to pivot and make big changes, especially in the responsive realm, right? Like you're playing with things and you're dragging your browser around all the time, and there's this one spot where everything just feels wrong. You can just go change your breakpoint variable, and yeah, that feels better. You know, and I had to change one line. That's a big win.
Can you explain the limitation? You mentioned the limitation before.
What is it? I don't remember. I think I was talking about CodeKit.
Okay.
CodeKit is an application that you run on OS X, and it's great to try stuff out, but it has its own Compass and Sass code bundled inside of it, which sometimes gets out of date with other stuff you want to use, and it gets really frustrating when you spend half your day on Google and forums, and then everybody says, oh, well, you know, it's because CodeKit has this bundled in. You should just use it on the command line.
What about the Compass app?
I never used the Compass app. Sorry.
You just use command.
I was using CodeKit and I started hitting issues and I just said, well, you know, there's my $30 and you know, I'm gonna go get it for free. And once you get things installed, you know, you're pretty good.
So just to make sure real quick, so then to use Sass or CSS, you can like install or say some sort of software like CodeKit,
You can,
or you can use command line.
yes, which I think is recommended. Just get comfortable. You know, if you're working in web development, you should have a comfort level on the command line, running a few simple commands on how to get around or copy things.
If anybody wants to install it, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great. So off the table over the next hour to install Sass and Compass.
What about less? Like,
Less is great. It's that's what I started with in pre-processing, but at some point, all the cool tools are these Compass extensions, and if that's not what Less is. There's Stylus, there's Bourbon, there's other preprocessors out there that do the similar things. Yep. And then these slides are a repository on GitHub. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your